Hello, I'm Dan, the Lettings Director at the Property Centre in Taunton. I get asked a lot by investment buyers whether they should go for a freehold property or a leasehold property. In the video today, I'm going to talk about the differences between the two and the pros and cons for both, and then my general thoughts as to what you should look at when deciding to purchase either freehold, leasehold, or any kind of property. So, a leasehold property is essentially when you own a part of a property or a part of something that is on a land, and you then pay a ground rent and service charge to a freeholder to have access to a building or the rest of the land. So a really good typical example is a flat. So if this is a block of flats, you would own this one. You own everything within that compartment of the block, but you don't own the whole block or the land that it sits on. The freeholder owns the block itself and the land that it sits on. What would happen is you pay a ground rent and a management fee to the freeholder. The difference is with freehold is essentially you own the property and the land that it sits on entirely. So you own that plot of the world, basically. It's not a part of something that's already built that you own. It's all of it in its entirety. So some of the benefits right off the bat is obviously with this, if you're looking at it as a buy-to-let investment, the ground rent and management fees that you pay are going to eat into your profits. They are subject to increasing as well, much of everything. It will kind of raise in time. So if you're buying one, very important to have a look at the kind of clauses surrounding that, because sometimes it'd be very open-ended that the ground rent or management charges can be increased willy-nilly whenever. Other times there is a fair increase clause or a certain percentage or a doubling period. So very important to have your solicitor overlook this to make sure they're not going to fly up through the roof in the next 6 months after buying. But that is something to consider, is your gross return is going to be better with a freehold property than what it will be with this if you're factoring this into it. Some of the other things to consider is part of that is insurance is included. So there will be insurance that covers the block and the plot that it's built on. So one less thing for you to worry about as opposed to buying a freehold property. Work is mostly covered by block management. So don't get me wrong, if anything happens within the property, if a kitchen cupboard falls off the wall, that's not going to be covered by block management. But a lot of the expensive things like roofs, subsidence, brickwork, anything that involves the block as a whole will be coming out of the freeholders and block management's pocket, not yours as the owner of the flat or leasehold. So it can, as much as it's more expensive for one hand with the fees, it can save you money with big maintenance works you don't have to worry about. One of the things that you should be considering if you're looking at a leasehold property that's part of a block is being very cautious to see if there's any cladding. Ever since the Grenfell disaster, the legislation on this has changed a little bit, and it requires any block of flats or block that is over 3 stories high that has any cladding to have an EWS1 form, which is a form that only certain surveyors can get. If you don't have one of these, it can really cause some problems with getting a mortgage on the property. So be cautious with cladding if you're looking at a leasehold property. In general, to summarise the leasehold property, you pay a little bit more, which can eat into your returns, but you know what your returns are going to be. There's a bit more surety there, and you don't have to be as involved, because if anything goes wrong, if there's a leak, you get on the phone to the block management company and it'd be them that are sorting it. It'd be them that are doing the big jobs. So less profitable in the first instance, but less hassle later on down the line. So that is what a leasehold property essentially looks like. A freehold, where you own a house, for instance, on a plot as a front and back garden, you own all of that. Now, there might be certain things that come as part of the title of that property. Sometimes there can be a right of access directly through your front garden, which you'd want to be careful of. But typically, with a freehold property, you own the house, you own the plot that it's on, and everything within that portion of the world is yours. It's also your responsibility. So you own a property entirety as well as the land. There are no additional fees other than insurance. If you opt to get insurance, which I would wholeheartedly recommend, everyone has a good buildings and contents insurance, especially if you're letting the property out, then that isn't going to be included as part of the block management. So be very cautious to source a reliable insurance and set that up if you are renting out a freehold property. If things go wrong, you are fully responsible. A cost of a roof is a hell of a lot of money. It's a lot more than what your yearly fees are going to be in ground rent and service charges. So if you're buying a freehold property as an investor, one of the things I'd wholeheartedly recommend you do is get a survey to get a really good understanding of how well maintained that asset has been and how sort of up together it is. Because anything that goes wrong, any subsidence, any building work, any roofing work, any leaks, is all going to be paid for solely by the landlord. So it might be more profitable right now. Prepare for the worst and factor that into your long-term equations. Typically, freehold properties are better for capital appreciation. They are typically a tad more popular than leasehold properties to purchase. So they can oftentimes be a better buy if you're thinking of buying something for the long term. Obviously, there are a million different examples that you could take from this. One flat in a really desirable block might appreciate better than a house on a less desirable road. But typically speaking, like for like, houses and freehold properties tend to, in my opinion, perform better over time. So, what should you buy if you are a buy to let investor? My answer to that is either, if it makes sense. When you're doing your sums, you'll be doing what's called a gross and a net yield. A gross yield is what is the rent going to bring in against the property purchase price. Now, it might be a case that one comes out as a 7 or 8% yield, another one comes out as a 5 or 6% yield. What I believe you should do as an investor then is factor in other costs. So average out what you think the maintenance cost of this is going to be over 10 years, divide that to give you a yearly average, and then sort of factor that into what's going to be your net yield. And with this, factor in the ground rent and everything else into a net yield. Once all things are being considered equally, the general maintenance of this over a long period of time, broken down into an average yearly amount, plus insurance, so on and so forth, and the costings of this, whatever your net yields are, they should be the ones that you focus on. Other than that, there's other things to consider. If you want a more hands-off investment, then a leasehold property can be a better option. If you want a property where you've got a bit more control, where you can potentially go in and make some improvements, but you are going to have to be a little bit more involved, then a freehold property can be a better option. Ultimately, either can work. There's good and bad examples of both. But what it would come down to is how hands-off you probably want to be as an investor, and what that net yield is going to be. Don't take yields at face value, because the net yields can be made to look different by various different factors. On paper, this yield might look better. You start factoring in all of the maintenance costs you're going to have to cover yourself for a freehold property. All of a sudden, it can look very, very different. So get your net yield, focus on what it is you're personally looking to do and get out of investing in property, and then make an informed decision off the back of those two things. Or, as I always say in these videos, I'm more happy to hold your hand through any purchase as a buy-to-let investor. So feel free to get in touch with me. I will let you know what my concerns, thoughts, and opinions are going to be. You give me an idea of what your strategy is. I can tell you how well any leasehold or freehold property match that strategy.